hate you so much right now. I hate you so much right now. All right, that's enough of that song. That is by Kelly's. I don't even know if I got the melody right. And then I know there's a scream. Ah! So I use that song because anger is part of the grief process. It's one of the steps. That's what I'll be talking about today in this episode of Answering the Inner Call. I'm your host, Malika Lee. I'm so happy to be here with you again at this time, at this place. May the meditations of my heart and the words from my mouth be right on time. So with that, let's get to it. Okay, so in the 5 points of being a spiritual super shining star, super duper star, I talked about, I think it's point number 4, doing your spiritual emotional work. Doing your spiritual work, which is encompassing of your emotional work. And I want to talk about grief, honey, and share a personal story with that. I'm not going to go into the depths of it, but I'm going to share enough, hopefully, that gives some insight and perspective on what it can look like, what it can be like. So my father passed away quite suddenly in 2014. In fact, I was with him. We'll save that for another time. I have a lot of daddy stories because he was one of the great teachers, as parents often are, on my spiritual curriculum journey, as is my mom. Wonderful spiritual teacher, just what my soul needed. And my maternal grandmother. These 3 raised me to be single, raised me each as single parents at different formative years of my life. As an adult, like I just said, my father passed away quite suddenly, and it was a shock. It was a shock. And I think what happens, and this has been my experience, and I've heard other people say this, is that when we don't have the capacity, when we don't have the time, we don't have the skills, we don't have whatever it is to be able to tend to those wounds and to do our emotional work, then it won't show up. We'll just keep moving along, plugging along. And so with my father's passing, I had done enough work. In hindsight, I'm looking at this to have the capacity to be able to lean into this grief. And so what ended up happening as a byproduct is that grief brought up, it was like a magnet, and it brought up other unresolved grief that I had had throughout my entire life before that point, that I had not had the time, the skills, the capacity, the support to work through before then. And what I did differently this time around as it related to grief, as opposed to the other times in my life, was one, I gave myself the space to lean in. Like I said, I had a lot more tools at my disposal and understanding. And I really gave myself the space to feel it and to face it. And what I mean by space, or how I had not done that before, I really was high functioning in a lot of chaos growing up. And, you know, at those times, in some ways, I had convinced myself that some of the challenges that I had didn't affect me. And that I don't want to say it didn't matter. I don't know if that was one of the things that I said, but I basically really believed that it didn't affect me. And what I did was, my coping was work. I loved school. At school, high functioning, I could, be so present at school. I'm not thinking about, whatever instability or things are going on at home, right? So it's just like school was my escape. So it's that whole workaholism thing, or, and it's a form of an addiction, right? Of not facing the discomfort of what's happening. So when my father passed, and I was seeing a therapist at the time, and I think that the greatest gift that I gave myself was to not be so attached to how I looked and how things looked on the outside. And what that meant for me was asking my therapist to write me a letter to fill out the paperwork for me to have intermittent family leave, because what our society does not do is it does not want you. That's why a lot of people are going, mad, having to be still with COVID, right? Because some of us, are coping is to keep moving. If you keep moving, you don't have to stand still and face some things. And so by having the permission and the FMLA to be able to tend to my dad's affairs, but also to tend to my heart and to things, that really was something different that I had not done, because in the past I had prided myself on keeping everything together and still not juggling 50 balls and not dropping any of them, which wasn't always kind to me, wasn't being kind to myself. And so when I had the space to lean into and to face the grief that, that definitely was present with my father, it brought up some grief in different instances from when I was even as young as like 2.5 years old, 7 years old, 16 years old, all these different areas that I didn't even realize that I had grief, because I didn't have the capacity and or the bandwidth and or the support, the skills to be able to process it, to be able to handle it, to acknowledge it. And so I say that to say that there might be some things going on in your life that it's not time to face it because it's not time. But when it's time and you're ready, of course you have to lean into it. Like I had to make space for it. But it can be one of the most healing, one of the most rewarding things that you can do for yourself. And that is really a lot of the work that I enjoy doing with people, is really creating this nurturing, loving space for people to heal those pains of their heart. Because once you can heal that, it really up levels your emotional homeostasis, like whatever your resting energy is at, it up levels it because you've let go of some of your baggage. And so that means the buoyancy, like if it's a balloon, right? And you have all these weights on this balloon, and then you allow yourself to let some of those weights go, of course the balloon is going to be able to fly higher. Energetically, it's the same thing. When I was able to let some of that baggage go, and that emotional pain under this guise of grief specifically, then I was able to my baseline and energy level and resting state was at a much higher energy level, much more pleasant, felt much lighter. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of that personal story with you. But I mean, it included really giving myself space and being compassionate with myself, and to let go of what I thought other people's expectations might be of me, and making way more self-honoring choices. So there's so much more story related to this experience that I had, and it cannot be really with depth gone over in this instance. But for the purpose of talking about doing the emotional work and its benefits and what it looked like for me, and having breathing room and the benefits of doing it and the challenging thing of doing it. But one of the other things I wanted to say that was different with this instance compared to some of the other instances that I had of loss is acceptance. And I had done my work specifically with my father ahead of time, from the trial and error and observation of learning from other instances, where it was like I really tried to work out and do things with my father so that nothing was left unsaid. So then when he passed, it was like that relief of I had done all the work, all the communication, all the effort. And we had been in a good space for the last, 2 years of his life. So that was a difference. And then the acceptance piece was, like I said, I was with him when he made his transition, and it was sudden. And I knew that if he was supposed to make it, that he would have, because, I was there, I called 911, like all the things that would have set him up for success had he, if he was supposed to make it, then he would have. So I think those are the things that allowed this grief to land differently as I moved through it compared to other instances. And I would say that those other instances were all learnings for me to do things differently in this time around. So that's a little bit of the emotional work. Like I said, I love doing this type of work. If you are ready to experience a greater sense of freedom, a greater sense of peace, please consider working with me. I would love the opportunity to be of service in that way. I love doing this kind of work and, offering that nurturing, compassionate, empathetic space that unfortunately isn't available often enough for many people. So I'll have a link in the description with scheduling a consult just for us to get better acquainted, to hear what you're up to, and to see if we're a good fit for one another. In the meantime, between time, many blessings. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Bye for now.